I went into this not knowing very much about it. The logline kind of seemed cool. A general rundown, spoiler free right now, is there's a civil war going on, 17th century England, and then this one guy, he is a alchemist apprentice, I believe it was, and then they try to escape from the war. He meets up with a bunch of people, and apparently there's this treasure that they have to find. And that's kind of just like the general logline premise right there. After I watched this movie, my thoughts initially to like, if I'm talking to somebody who hasn't seen the movie, this is what I gotta say. I think like it's a very experimental movie. And honestly, when I watched it, I don't think I was in the right headspace. Definitely a lot of the lines went over my head because I was too busy trying to figure out what was going on with these characters. And a lot of their dialogue definitely on a rewatch could lead to more deeper meanings and trying to figure out exactly what happens. But in general, it's a very experimental, surrealist interpretation of the horrors of war. And like it said in the trailer, it was saying the horrors of war compare nothing to the horrors of the mind. And it's very cerebral, very dreamlike. I think that's a perfect word to put into this. It's very much about the feel of the movie and the technical elements all blending together to form this, very dreamlike, weird, absurdist piece of work that is dealing with these characters and how they're not only dealing with the overall war, but how they're like interacting with each other and their conflicting motivations on what they want. And that whole spiel I just gave, that's very vague. Okay, that's just for somebody who hasn't seen it. If you're going into this movie looking for a straightforward narrative, like a drama about people fighting about a war and, interpersonal conflict, and you just want like a heavy hitting drama, like this is not the movie for that. It's definitely a more art house piece that you have to think about. And so going full on into spoilers into this movie, I think that my interpretation of it, so right after I watched this, I was quite confused, albeit I'll say that. I'll be honest. And initially, my mind went to specifically the horrors of war because there was the bookmark of the beginning. It's like him escaping the war. You see some explosions. You never see any actual action going down. So clearly the way it was filmed is that they didn't have a big budget. And so you're just like, they kind of hop over these shrubs and then they're just in this field. They hear the war and they try to escape it. And then it gets bookmarked in the end when he comes back to it. And so this main character that we're following, let me just remember his name, Whitehead. He escapes the war, and then at the end, it's a lot of, we're definitely following him as the protagonist and his character development going from this more cowardly. He states it outright. He's like, I'm a coward. I'm leaving this war, blah, blah, blah. He's trying to find this guy. And then at the end of this film, he puts on a more empowering image, not only with his clothing, just with his demeanor as well. And he goes back into the war. Now, trying to figure out why this transformation happened was still a bit blurry to me right after watching it. So it's just like, okay, so he went in this field with these bunch of guys and they tripped on some shrooms and this one guy tried to take power and then he was like, no, I'm not going to let you take power. And then he came out victorious by like channeling, by taking the mushrooms and channeling the energy of this field. And I was like, okay, why did this transformation happen? As in, like, why did his character, what was his arc from being a coward to being more empowered? And why did that happen? And honestly, I don't really think I still have a clear answer for that. But some of the stuff I was reading about this film, I think a good interpretation that people had was that during the war, all of these people, all the band, I believe it was 5 of them, they were all killed. And then this is kind of like the purgatory. And then the more antagonist character, I believe it was O'Neill. Let me just double check here. Yeah, O'Neill. He is kind of like the devil trying to tempt them to go to hell while they're trying to get to this alehouse that is heaven, I guess. I don't know if the alehouse represented that. Maybe the alehouse is kind of just like the devil making that up. And then it's like tempting them because, beer is kind of just like, it's a vice. Alcohol is a vice, and it's tempting them to try to take that vice. And so, yeah, it kind of feels like a milieu a purgatory in a sense. And I think I really do like that interpretation because they're just off of the sideline of the war. And in this instance, it's like, okay, you're deserting a war. And all you have to do, it's kind of like stripping the people into a natural location and just having them deal with themselves and each other, kind of like Lord of the Flies, where you're stripping them away from modern society and having them deal with each other and their true selves come out, just putting them in this location and in this environment. And that's what the field is representing. And yeah, man, I honestly don't have too much more to say about this movie. It was very confusing and I'm still trying to process it. I gave it a 3 stars. Um, it honestly wasn't my cup of tea, but I could definitely see other people trying to really dissect this and analyzing it more. I think some of the lines, like I said, went over my head that could still be of a lot of importance. So I was just trying to deal with the plot there and the analogies. What does it mean? Is it a purgatory? And where is it going? Okay, there's a line where Whitehead says, "A man can hold much inside him that he does not comprehend after he spits out a stone and runes on it. The shrooms gave him like a Dutch courage." Okay, that's an interesting line, because if they are in a purgatory, like a judgment zone, then in this field, they're kind of like letting all of their feelings out. I'm still trying to figure out a bit here what's happening, but yeah, in this judgment zone, and if they're like putting out all of these feelings and all of their showing their true sides, whereas a lot of the other guys, they went like right for this mushroom soup that made them trip. Some of them, there's like one, he's just kind of like a buffoon. He doesn't know what's happening. There's one of them who kind of seems more like a warrior, and then this one guy who seems like he's partnering with O'Neill. And the narrative, it's hard to discern their exact characters and their loyalties, but they're all struggling to find this lost treasure, and some of them just deal with it in different ways. You watch it 3 times and you still don't get it? Yeah, I think that's still like... I feel like if I watch it again, I'm still not going to get it. And I mean, I think that we still have to praise Ben Wheatley a lot for that, because it's a movie where even though we've watched it myself 1 time and you maybe 3 times, it is still confusing, but confusing in the way that we definitely see that a lot of thought has been put into this film. It's still very technically proficient, and we can tell that it's so well thought out by Ben Wheatley and by his writing partner, and that there is a lot to dissect to the movie. And it's not just like, we're not just passing it off as just some confusing art house film. It definitely seems like there is a lot there still. Like with the thing in the sky, the circle in the sky, the black circle in the sky. I'm still not sure what that's about. I love the image of having it in the sky, and it's like a subtle, like supernatural thing, which is kind of cool. But still, yeah, not really sure what that means. There's things like, oh yeah, that one scene that a lot of people like in the Letterboxd comments are like, oh, that one scene. And here, let me try to find it in the trailer for a second. I know there was an image from it, this scene, where he goes into this tent with O'Neill. He screams for like a minute straight. And then he comes out, and it's this slow-mo shot of him with this creepy face tied to this rope. And he just starts running. Like very animalistic. And it was such a stark image, so unsettling, but it was so effective. And it's like, yeah, there's so many moments of this film where it's like a lot of the images are just like creeping you out. There's so many like weird things that are happening in this movie. And that's really good thematically related to maybe like the horrors of war, the horrors of the mind. It's just like, a lot of the times when you're dealing with those subjects, it can't be just like straightforward narrative and very obvious metaphors. It's like you really have to feel it with the cinematography, with like the creepiness of it, and it nails that. So I feel like these kinds of films, the director doesn't necessarily have one idea of what it all means. Yeah, I agree. A lot to do with Elizabethan alchemy. Particularly a man called John Dee who used that black mirror. Yeah, there was definitely that like alchemist magical side. He comes out seemingly insane in some kind of a trance. Yeah, so in this scene, if we're trying to relate it to alchemy, I guess, or just like magic in general. So he like some sort of weird supernatural torture that's happening to him. He comes out, and is this him like trying to find whatever treasure with this animalistic, insane grin on his face? And he goes to, I don't know, runs to maybe find the treasure that they were looking for. And what is that all trying to say? I don't know. Maybe it's trying to deal with like people try to take advantage of other people because he is a very religious person and religion was not nowadays what it is back then. So maybe he's trying to take advantage of his religiousness. I don't even know what it means. I honestly, yeah, I don't think I have too much to say about this one because, like, man, it's such a creepy, unsettling. There's the power dynamics between all of them because you have him going up to O'Neill and he's like, "Hey, I'm here to capture you. You're who I came to get. You're my prisoner now." And then he's like, "Oh no, you're not. You're my prisoner actually." And the power dynamic. So it's like it could be dealing with people taking advantage of each other, not only in like a war where it's so intense and draining. Maybe it's like people taking advantage of each other in this time where it's like alchemy and thoughts of magic are just people's way of trying to take advantage of other people because it's not real, as we know. Magic's not real. Sorry, guys. Hate to burst the bubble. In the end, if you're trying to like boil this down to a narrative, you would think like, okay, it could be like a purgatory. It could be just like a really bad trip. These guys on shrooms. Because yeah, it's like they take shrooms and then everything goes insane. The kaleidoscopic imagery was really, really cool. A lot of flashing lights, I'll say that. Don't watch this if you are unsettled by flashing lights. But those scenes as well were just really, really cool. And I feel like, yeah, there's the scene in the end where it's like all the strobing lights, all these images on top of each other. And that's kind of like when the power dynamic shifts. And it's kind of like him, our main character, Whitehead, he finally is understanding the situation. He's finally rising up for himself in this montage. And then there's that fight. There's that scene where it's like they're shooting at each other and then the wind goes real crazy and then they're talking, but it's clearly like voiceovers and not the actual diegetic sound that's happening. And it felt very out of body in that sense. And I think this movie is a lot of compilations of really, really cool, dreamlike, surrealist imagery that comes together in this package of the brutality of war and what that does to somebody's mind and the power dynamics between that. And yeah, it was just like, it's almost like you have Lord of the Flies where it's these kids dropped in this island, this natural location, and they have all this conflict. But it's almost like you took all of these guys, the inner workings of their brain, dropped them in this field in England, and now their minds are duking it out rather than their normal, logical, physical selves. Yeah, I like that. That was completely my own concoction interpretation, and it kind of has some sense to it. But in the end, this movie doesn't make a lot of sense, but stylistically, it's crazy and so deep. It's so avant-garde. And yeah, I don't think it's necessarily for me. I don't think this is the type of movie that I really enjoy dissecting. I enjoy dissecting like more science fiction, surrealist, cerebral concepts. Ben Wheatley doesn't give you anything in terms of narrative, what's actually happening. It's like you have to do so much work to try to figure out what's happening. But man, I gotta respect it. It was a weird movie. It was very deep. A lot of themes you could still tell from the lack of narrative and just the style in general. So I got to give it props there. But in general, yeah, I enjoyed it. If I were to watch it again, I would really have to be in a mood to actually take in this type of movie because, yeah, I don't think that I gave it its full due when I was watching it. But it was an interesting watch. I'm glad I watched it. Thank you for the recommendation.